One of the first concepts I learned in anthropology class was a concept called materialism. The theory suggests that the development of cultures is the result of material needs and circumstances. In other words, environment determines culture. The theory suggests things like, well, if your culture is from somewhere like, say, a desert, your culture will probably not have a very elaborate system around, say, seafaring or maybe shipbuilding. Cultures that come from places that don't have very good access to a diverse range of dyes are unlikely to have, say, painting as a very elaborated part of their culture. If your culture comes from some place that's very cold, your material culture will likely be very elaborated around making clothes that are both aesthetically pleasing, but are also very capable of keeping you warm, say, your house, your jackets. I know in Canada we certainly have lots of this. And if your culture comes from somewhere that's very hot, you will likely have an elaborated material culture for keeping you cool. Your houses will be constructed in a way like this. Your clothes will be tailored for something like this. I know I certainly saw lots of that when I went to northern Greece. Houses were made very differently from how they make houses in Canada. The theory's scientific style logic makes it extremely appealing to the Westerner and their scientistic culture, like I explained in my other video. It's a theory that has a very clean, logical nature to it. It's very sensical and also mechanical. I know that I've heard many, we'll say, cultural wisdoms, little pieces of knowledge that people share between each other. I've heard it many times based on this theory, and I'm sure many of my countrymen will also have heard some of this. The one I hear most often surrounds how it's a sin to eat pigs in Judaism and Islam because they're considered unholy animals. The theory suggests that it's a sin to eat pigs in Islam and Judaism because these religions are primarily centered on the desert. Pigs require a lot of water to maintain, especially in a large population of them. So the theory sort of thinks that people made it a sin to eat them because it would be terribly wasteful of water to have a large population sustained of them in the desert. Similarly, the theory also suggests that cows are holy in Hinduism and thus forbidden to eat because India's natural environment could not sustain a large population of cows for just common human consumption. It's a cute little theory that makes a cute kind of sense with its perfect logical matching. But the reality is, it's wrong. The problem we immediately run into with this theory is that these cultures already give us an explanation for why they do what they do. In Hinduism, the cow is a divine creature. And, well, I personally wouldn't eat a god. And in Islam and Judaism, the pig is considered unholy, thus it's, I guess, spiritually dirtying to consume them. So immediately, you have to presume they're wrong. You know, these kind folk who have decided to take the time out of their day to gracefully tell you about their culture and their day-to-day lives, you're going to tell them, well, you see, you're wrong, my friend. I'm the first person in my life who will often doubt people, like, is that truly the reason, or is there another truth to the matter? But I think presuming that I know more about someone else's culture than they themselves do, that's another thing entirely. And I think it's a bit of bad imagery, maybe bad branding for, some white guy like myself to show up at your door, suck you dry of all the information you have on your culture, and then to write a beautiful, well-written paper that will be published in the entire world saying, oh yeah, these people are entirely deluded about why they do what they do in their own culture. The West doesn't really like religious or traditional explanations for things. Westerners prefer things to happen for logical reasons, for scientific reasons, even when those things aren't necessarily scientific or inherently logical. Cultures are not hard sciences. They are systems of ideas created and comprised of individuals. Individuals capable of doing things for sometimes no reason at all. This theory creates an image that culture is somehow intelligently designed to survive its natural environment. While a certainly interesting piece of science fiction, I do not think it is reasonable at all to assume that there's some sort of hyper-intelligent designer ancestor who thought, I need to trick all of my people and their descendants into doing this cultural facet so that they can survive. That is an enormous amount of intelligence and an enormous amount of hard design you're putting into something as organic as culture. Plain and simply, there is no consistent or reliable way to track whether a tradition or cultural facet was born of material reasons or no reason at all. With no verifiable way to test your hypothesis, your theory will permanently remain hypothetical. It will always just make a cute kind of sense. I might be able to say that things based on this theory are perhaps educated guesses, but even that would be kind of a stretch, because ultimately the problem is all the evidence is inherently circumstantial. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that there is probably an example out there of a culture developing some sort of facet to meet the demands of their material environment. I would, however, not presume to say that my material explanation for their non-material tradition somehow supersedes what they believe. Now I have a theory of my own. Now I know I just did explain that materialism is a somewhat flawed theory for explaining all of culture and their developments. However, there is no denying the fact that the environment does play a part in the development and birth of cultures. Not to a degree that I can say that all facets of cultures are materially motivated, but it is not hard to spot that there is a pattern. There is an order to be found in the mush of culture. Now, I want to just give myself a little insurance policy for my theory, because ultimately it is just a little fun thought experiment. It's by no means something serious that I've committed to, or that I would suggest it's an all-encompassing theory. But I will say, what if materialism has it backwards? What if it isn't cultures rising to the occasion of their natural environments? What if it is instead that their environment determines which culture survives? So only the one with the right traits to exist in that region of the world is the one that succeeds. Now, I'm sorry, I must take a quick break in order to prostrate myself to ask for forgiveness for dabbling in the dark anthropological arts of evolutionism. So those examples I mentioned earlier, they can now be reversed. So the holy cow in Hindu culture isn't there because of some explanation for some development. Instead, Hinduism is there because its laws allowed it to survive in that natural environment. Similarly, the pig in Hinduism and Islam allowed its people to survive in that natural environment. You can wager that there were probably many attempts, many culture startups that tried and failed to survive in those environments. But those ones in particular, the ones that survived, are the ones that survived. So we can start taking guesses at things. You know, like, I live in Canada. It's pretty darn cold here, and it's cold in other places in the world. So what if there were like thousands of little tribes that had nudist cultures in their system, but they all died out because it turns out nudism's not terribly great for surviving the harsh winters up in these hostile parts of the world. Now, obviously, as I said earlier, my theory is not all-encompassing. It is by no means a good idea to think, well, all culture is explainable through this way. Because obviously, the theory I've just suggested has this like static view of culture, that you just have to be the right culture right at the start and you'll never change ever again. Cultures change on the fly, and just because something changes doesn't mean it's a hard reset. So it's not like Hinduism is an entirely new culture than what it was some years ago just because one thing about it changed. And I've noticed that this universalization of a lot of anthropological theories is kind of a problem in my schooling, because often I'll get readings that have this 1 versus 1 of different anthropological explanations, but I'm reading them, it's like neither one of these is inherently wrong. For example, I had to do a reading on psychic unity or diffusion, and they were trying to explain the invention of technologies. So, was the bow invented once and diffused through the entire world, or was it invented multiple times? And the obvious truth of the matter is, neither one of them is wrong. Obviously, things like the bow, the wheel, the basket, they were probably invented many times in multiple places throughout history. It's not wrong. Similarly, things like, say, the Maxim machine gun was probably invented once in one place, but diffused. So examples from both exist, and they do not discount the other. Thus, why should we discount one theory over the other? Different anthropological theories, like the one I invented for this video, don't describe everything. They describe one avenue by which culture is born, or by which culture changes, or by which culture develops, or by which culture is shaped. They do not discount each other, unless they do, but often they are describing individual ways our cultures are influenced by things around us.